Okay, so I bet you've at least heard the name Yasuke before.
Yeah.
You know, the African samurai. But how much do you really know about this guy's journey?
Well, we're going to try to take you beyond just the headlines and uncover a story that's going to take us deep into 16th century Japan.
Yeah, it's a fascinating period. Think about it. Warring states, powerful samurai, a society that's really like right on the edge of change. And then right in the middle of all of this, you have an African man who becomes a samurai serving under Oda Nobunaga.
Exactly. Oda Nobunaga was one of the most, formidable warlords of the time.
Right. So to kick things off, what's something fascinating that you've learned about this period?
What's so interesting to me is that this isn't just some kind of cultural clash. This was like a whole world colliding with another.
Yeah.
And, when we look at the sources we have, it reveals a globe that's surprisingly interconnected. Like even Queen Elizabeth I, she was demanding updates all the time on this Japanese embassy that was visiting Europe. And at the same time, the Jesuit printing press, which was in Japan, was churning out books like crazy.
Oh, wow. It really puts things into perspective for Yasuke's story, doesn't it?
Definitely.
But let's start with the biggest mystery surrounding him, where he came from. What do we actually know about Yasuke's origins?
So we know for sure that he got to Japan in 1579, and he was with this Jesuit missionary, Alessandro Valignano. And he was described as physically imposing, like a big guy, and then pretty quickly he moves up in the ranks under Nobunaga.
Wow.
But his early life, the primary sources are really, really limited.
So it's kind of like trying to put together this puzzle, but half of the pieces are missing.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. But, historians, they're clever, and they use these context clues, like the physical descriptions of him, the slave trade back then, the practices of the Jesuits, and these offer, hints.
Do any of these hints point to, a particular region or a specific group of people that Yasuke might have belonged to?
Well, one theory that a lot of people find really convincing is that he was Dinka from South Sudan.
Right.
The Dinka people, they're known for being tall and they're really skilled cattle herders, but they're also known for being pretty fierce warriors.
Oh.
And, that actually aligns with what we already know about Yasuke.
Can you imagine, that journey, though? From South Sudan all the way to Japan, it's mind-blowing. The hardships he must have endured, it's incredible.
It really is. And the thing is, it lines up with a route that was common back then for slaves, going from Africa to India.
Okay.
So Yasuke, he might have actually even been a Habshi.
Hold on. Habshi, what is that?
So Habshi were these elite soldiers.
Okay.
And they were often used, employed by rulers all over India. They were highly skilled, and they played a pretty significant role in a lot of different conflicts.
So Yasuke, he might have actually already been a seasoned warrior before he even stepped foot in Japan.
It's definitely possible.
This really changes how we see his resilience.
Yeah.
Adapting, improving himself, not once, but multiple times.
Yeah. And this brings up a question. What kind of person not only survives, but thrives in those conditions? Right. Which leads us to Yasuke in Nobunaga's court.
Yeah. And this is where it gets even more interesting because Nobunaga was not your average, warlord.
Oh, yeah.
He was very open to innovation, especially things like firearms. He really saw how they could reshape warfare.
Absolutely.
And he even went so far as to defy a lot of the conventions at the time.
He was a real visionary, that's for sure. And he actually received a gift that totally symbolizes this. He got these Kunazukushi cannons, which, if you translate it literally, it means nation destroyer.
Wow.
And they were gifted by the Jesuits. It kind of foreshadows how technology would end up shaping Japan's future.
A powerful symbol, yeah. So where does Yasuke fit into all of this?
Well, Yasuke was living proof of Nobunaga's global outlook, Having an African samurai in his service was this big display of power.
Yeah.
And it was also a sign that he was willing to embrace, the unusual.
Yeah.
The exotic.
But was that really all it was? Just a way for Nobunaga to show off?
That's a good question.
Or was Yasuke's position more significant than that?
It's important to remember that being a samurai back then wasn't as rigid as we might think. Talented people, even those from outside of Japan, they could rise in the ranks.
So Yasuke's role, it might have gone beyond just being a bodyguard.
It's very likely. Yeah.
What else might he have been doing?
Some sources suggest that he was involved in diplomacy or even military strategy.
Wow.
It makes you think about the Dinka spearmaster,
Mhm.
a spiritual and political leader. That's a role that Yasuke, he might have understood.
It adds a whole other layer to Yasuke's story for sure. But speaking of turning points, let's get into the Hanchuji incident. This is where things really change, not just for Yasuke, but for all of Japan.
Yeah, so this happens in 1582. Nobunaga was betrayed
Oh, wow.
by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, and he was besieged at this temple, the Hanaji Temple. It was in Kyoto.
And why did Akechi betray him?
That's a great question. Akechi's motives, they're still debated to this day.
Really?
It could have been ambition, revenge, maybe something else altogether. It's a mystery that still intrigues historians even now.
I can't imagine, being in that position.
But anyway, the siege ends with Nobunaga committing seppuku.
Seppuku?
Yeah, ritual suicide. He chose that instead of being captured by his enemies.
Oh, wow.
It involved a kaishakunin, someone trusted to deliver the final blow and make sure the death was quick and honorable.
I can only imagine the chaos of that whole scene, the ritual, and to think Yasuke might have been right there in the middle of it. What must that have been like?
It's believed that he actually played a key role in protecting Nobunaga's head so that it wouldn't fall into enemy hands.
Why was protecting his head so important?
Well, taking the head of a defeated enemy, that was a huge symbolic act, super powerful. If Akechi had taken Nobunaga's head, it would have really made his claim to power a lot stronger.
So Yasuke, by preventing that from happening, he might have actually influenced the course of Japanese history.
It's definitely possible.
That's incredible. Makes you wonder about what happened to Yasuke after the Hanaji incident. What became of the African samurai?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. The sources, they get really thin after this point. We're left with more questions than answers.
So his fate after this huge event, it's a mystery. Kind of like a cliffhanger in the middle of a really good story.
Exactly. And that's what makes his story so captivating, right? So we're back, diving deeper into the world of Yasuke, the African samurai. And last time, we were talking about how the historical record just kind of goes quiet about what happened to him after the Hanaji incident.
It's like we're left guessing, filling in the gaps with all these different possibilities.
Right, exactly. So let's put on our historical detective hats and try to figure this out.
Okay. What are the most likely scenarios for what Yasuke might have done after Nobunaga died?
Well, one possibility is he went back to the Jesuits.
Yeah.
They were always kind of there throughout his time in Japan.
That makes sense. He might have sought refuge with them?
Yeah, looking for some familiarity in all the chaos.
Right.
But there's another possibility.
What's that?
He could have kept being a samurai.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But who would he have served?
Maybe one of Nobunaga's sons? Or maybe a different powerful warlord?
Wouldn't that have been super hard to do, though? I mean, things changed a lot in Japan after the Hanji incident.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
This started a period of transition that eventually led to what's called the Edo period. And that was a time of massive change for Japan.
What kind of changes are we talking about here?
Well, during the Edo period, they established this really strict social hierarchy.
Okay.
They kicked out the Christians, and they basically put an end to any kind of social mobility, like the kind that allowed someone like Yasuke to rise up in the first place.
So basically, that world that had given Yasuke a chance just disappeared.
Yeah. And then something completely different took its place.
A closed door. Wow.
Yeah. Even places like Nagasaki, they used to be so vibrant and multicultural. But during the Edo period, they became these isolated trading posts.
It's crazy how different that is from the Japan that Yasuke first experienced.
It is, right.
It really makes you wonder if he would even been allowed to stay in Japan.
Yeah, that's a good point. But whatever happened to Yasuke himself, his legacy, that's something that's lived on.
You're right. His story, it's captured people's imaginations for centuries.
Yeah.
It's in historical texts, it's in manga and anime, even video games.
That's true.
It's gone way beyond just pop culture too, right?
Oh, yeah. There's actually a lot of academic research now that's exploring Yasuke and the world that he lived in. It's helping us understand this whole chapter of history better.
It's a powerful story.
It is.
It really makes you think about your own assumptions about the past.
Absolutely. And it shows us how complex cultural exchange can be. And it celebrates, just how diverse the human experience really is.
Mm-hmm. It also makes you think about the choices that people make when they're dealing with things that are beyond their control.
That's a great point.
Do you think Yasuke tried to hold on to the life that he built for himself? Or did he just adapt and try to forge a new path, maybe even in a whole other country.
We might never know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But I think even with all that uncertainty, there's a really interesting truth here. Sometimes the legacies that are the most enduring are the ones that are shrouded in mystery.
Absolutely. We got to talk about the Daigenkai Dictionary. That was a huge project.
Sure. A massive undertaking. It reflects how Japan was trying to balance traditional knowledge and Western learning during the Edo period.
So it's kind of a window into how that society was dealing with all these new ideas and influences.
Exactly. And in this dictionary, there's actually a trace of Yase.
What do you mean?
A little echo of him being in Japan. The term kurobo.
Kurobo. I've never heard of that. What is it?
It's a word they use to describe Black people.
Okay.
And the fact that it's in the Daigenkai, it tells us that even though Japan was kind of closing itself off from the rest of the world, the memory of people like Yasuke, it was still there.
It's like a clue hidden in plain sight, reminding us of that time when cultures were mixing more freely. But it also kind of makes you wonder, is Kurobo just an acknowledgement that Yasuke existed? Or is there something a little darker going on there?
It's really interesting, right? It shows you how history can be complex and how sometimes it can contradict itself. Japan was becoming more isolationist, but it was still interacting with the rest of the world, just in a more controlled way. Maybe the word kurobo, even though it has a negative meaning, also tells us that people like Yasuke weren't completely forgotten. They left a mark on how the language and culture of Japan was changing, even if it was subtle.
That adds a whole other layer to this story, doesn't it? It's not just about Yasuke the person. It's about globalization and cultural exchange. Those forces were already shaping Japan centuries ago. And it makes you think about how people can become symbols, representing not just themselves, but this whole complicated mix of cultures and identities in a world that's constantly changing.
And that's what's so cool about exploring these hidden parts of history, right? We find things that challenge what we thought we knew and make us question the stories that we've been told. It's a good reminder that the past, it's never really set in stone. It's always open to new interpretations.
It really makes you wonder about all the other untold stories that are out there, all these people whose lives, like Yasuke's, just defied categories.
Yeah.
And they left their mark on the world in these surprising ways.
Yeah, and that leads to a big question. Why should all this matter to our listeners today?
Yeah.
What does a 16th century African samurai have to do with the 21st century?
It's a good question. It's easy to just see Yasuke as this fascinating historical figure. But his story, it offers us way more than that.
Yeah. Yasuke's journey, it's like this incredible testament to human resilience.
Right.
And adaptability. He dealt with different cultures, different languages, different social structures, and he managed to make a place for himself in a world that was, in a lot of ways, hostile to who he was.
And he did all of that during a time when everything was changing, when Japan itself was going through this huge transformation.
Exactly. And his story reminds us that even when we're faced with these challenges that seem impossible to overcome, we can find a way to not just survive, but thrive.
Yeah. It's a reminder that culture and identity, they're not fixed things. They're constantly changing.
They're being reshaped by the forces of history and by what people do.
Exactly. Yasuke's story challenges us to question what we think we know about the past.
To understand how complicated cultural exchange really is.
And to celebrate the fact that human experience is so diverse.
Right. So if you're feeling inspired by Yasuke's story, we want you to keep exploring with us. The All Sorts podcast, that's what we're all about. We're trying to dig up these hidden pieces of history, these stories that challenge us to think differently and help us understand the world in new ways. There's a whole world of untold stories waiting to be discovered. Each one of them is a testament to how resilient and ingenious humans are.
And we're here to guide you through all of that.
To connect the dots.
And to help you have those aha moments that make history come alive.
So go to our YouTube channel and hit that subscribe button.
And while you're at it, follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads.
Because we can do this together. We can unravel the threads of history, challenge what we think we know, and find the unexpected beauty in all of human experience.
And before we go, we'll leave you with one last question to think about.
Yeah.
What if Yasuke had been able to stay in Japan?
What would his life have been like during the Edo period? How would he have navigated all those changes in society?
We'll never know for sure, but it's definitely something to think about.
It is, yeah. And this is just a taste of the kind of deep dives you can expect from the All Sorts podcast.
So until next time, Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for those stories that remind us of the incredible power and potential that each and every one of us has. It's wild to imagine him, Yasuke, trying to deal with the Edo period, all those strict rules. That's a far cry from the Japan that welcomed him at first.
It makes you think about how much power a person really has over their own life when history is changing all around them. Could Yasuke have adapted again, found a new way to make a name for himself? Or would things have been totally different for him? It's a question that really sticks with you.
It reminds me of how his story still matters to us today. It's not just an adventure. It's about how our personal choices and history kind of intersect, those unexpected turns in life.
Exactly. And it highlights how, even when things are really tough and society is changing like crazy, people can still leave a mark on the world, whether it's through big, bold actions or just by being resilient.
Yasuke's story, it makes you think about the impact we have long after we're gone. It's not just what he did in it, it's how his story still inspires us centuries later.
His journey really embodies those themes that are super relevant today, resilience, adapting to new things, cultural exchange, and how complex identity can be. It's a timeless story when you think about it.
It makes you realize that history is packed with these untold stories. People who broke the mold, who challenged what everyone thought was possible. And it makes you wonder how many more Yasukes are out there, waiting for us to discover them.
That's the real magic of history, isn't it? Finding those moments of discovery, those little glimpses into lives that change how we see the past.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Yasuke, the African samurai, what's the main thing you want our listeners to take away?
Right.
Why should this story matter to them?
Yasuke's story reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of facts and dates in a book. It's a living thing. It's woven from people's lives and experiences, and we're always reinterpreting it and reshaping it as we find new perspectives and challenge old ideas.
It encourages us to dig deeper, to question the stories we've always been told, and to find those hidden stories that can show us how complicated the past really is.
Because sometimes those little details, those narratives that have been hidden, they can reveal profound truths about who we are and the world we live in. Just like Yasuke's journey, it spanned continents, crossed cultures, defied expectations, and left a mark on history that we're still talking about.
Well, if Yasuke's story got you curious and you want more, we invite you to keep exploring these untold tales with us. The All Sorts podcast, that's what we do. We dig up those forgotten voices, those hidden chapters that add to our understanding of what it means to be human.
We dive into the lives of people who dared to be different, who challenged the limits of what was thought possible, and their stories still inspire us and make us think, even centuries later.
So if you're ready to come along with us on this journey of discovery, head over to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. We've got a whole world of deep dives waiting for you.
Each one's been carefully crafted to spark your imagination and get you excited about history.
And hey, while you're at it, join our community on X, Instagram, and Threads. We'd love to hear your thoughts, share some insights, and keep the conversation going. Because, like Yasuke's story shows us, exploring history is something we do best when we do it together.
So until we meet again, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for those stories that remind us of the incredible tapestry of human experience. Because in each thread, in each life, there's a whole world waiting to be discovered.